The Minister will have received a letter this morning from the Irish Airline Pilots Association, and I need to put the content of that on the record of the House today. They state, Dear Minister, I refer to the transcript of the debate in Shannon on Thursday, the 16th of June 2022. An extract is attached for your convenience. A considerable amount of time in the debate was dedicated to the in-house (brackets or lack of) aviation technical expertise of the department officials. As you know, the R116 accident report does not comment favourably on the aviation technical expertise available in your department. It is IALPA's observation and concern that none of the officials we met with you to discuss the Air Navigation and Transport Bill demonstrated an aviation technical expertise at a level necessary to appreciate the significance of some provisions of the EASA regulation and guidance material and to support appropriate transposition into national legislation. It has been an issue of considerable concern that the Air Navigation and Transport Bill was drafted in the first instance by officials who had unique access to the draft R116 accident report, but had no expertise to the technical nuances of the accident report. As IALPA recalls the conversation, they stated that they took the draft findings into consideration when drafting the new bill, but this was not evident to us in our reading of the draft bill. It is our impression, and we could be wrong, that officials in your department relied heavily on the IAA for technical expertise in countering the IALPA amendments. It is our position that if this is the case, then it was wholly inappropriate for you to rely on the advice from the very entity, the reform of which is central thrust of the Air Navigation and Transport Bill. Further, we have pointed out in numerous correspondence what we believe to be incorrect or misleading interpretations of the ESA documentation, which appear to support the view that there is an absence of aviation technical expertise available to you in the department. As you will recall, your speech in the Oireachtas on November 2021 placed reliance on the Bureau Veritas report with regard to the IAA. We have raised with you directly the shortcomings in the Bureau Veritas report with respect to other recommendations in the R116 accident report. Shortcomings explicitly identified in the report by the report's author. Any reliance on this report as meeting the standards required in the recommendation is therefore, in our opinion, untenable. In summary, Minister, we are concerned by your response in the Shannon on the 16th of June when you stated, yes, we have expertise in the department in respect of. It is our observation that the department has not changed the aviation technical expertise available to it, or after the available to it before or after the R116 accident, March 2017, or since the publication of the accident report in November 2021. Now, Lasca Hirlock, we are discussing legislation here that will regulate the IAA and other entities in the state for quite some considerable time to come. I asked the Minister at the last engagement here, did she have an aviation expert on her staff? It is my belief, and it is also the belief of IALPA, that her response was that she did. This is factually untrue. There is no aviation expert in the Department of Transport. So the first thing I'd like to establish before we go any further is it the case that there is an expert or there is not an expert employed by the Department of Transport? I'm talking about a state employee, not a contractor, not a consultant. I'm talking about an employee of the state who is an aviation expert. I'd like that question answered, and when I get that answered, I want to come back in. Thank you.
Minister, do you wish to respond?
I responded to this the last time, just very conscious of getting through the legislation, Chairperson, and I will give a response again today, but I'd like to keep it brief if that is possible, because I'm conscious we have very important legislation here. The IAA has over 120 safety experts committed to their roles, including 25 highly experienced pilots with aggregated hundreds of years flying experience in all large aircraft types, 25 highly qualified and experienced engineers with aggregated hundreds of years experience in all aspects of airworthiness. Other safety experts include air traffic controllers, air navigation services engineers, aerodrome security, aircraft certification, pilot training and licensing, ground operations, charting, drone regulation, risk management, statistical analysis, aviation, medicine, etc. They're leading global experts in safety management systems, and they're members of ICAO Safety Management Panel, recognised and acknowledged by other states as an excellent regulator with frequent requests for assistance. Apart from the limited circumstances where there's a reason for a different approach, in normal practice, as with other expert agencies, the IAA is the key source of advice in relation to matters pertaining to aviation safety and security, and they're designed to be and are, coalface experts. The IAA is very extensive and they're highly regarded technical experts, and they operate as part of the executive framework, both with an obligation to decide on matters within their remit and on an independent basis. A different approach is appropriate where it's necessary to have expertise to assess the conduct of the functions by the IAA or in relation to the possible assignment to it of new functions, and the department has availed of such expertise on a number of occasions over recent years. My department has access to appropriate aviation expertise in order to provide effective oversight of the IAA. The department largely operates an external contracting model for specialist aviation expertise. Independent aviation experts are engaged periodically to conduct an examination of IAA's performance of its functions relating to the application and enforcement of safety standards pursuant to Section 32 of the IAA Act 1993. The most recent Section 32 examination was carried out in 2019, and the next one is scheduled for 2023. My department also recently contracted expertise to undertake a review of the IAA's regulation of areas outside the European aviation safety regulatory regime. In terms of advice in relation to the evolving aviation regulatory and safety oversight environment, the department has engaged external expertise to advise on, among other things, the framing of aviation Coast Guard activity provisions in the Air Navigation Transport Bill, and advice to inform our engagement with the Irish Aviation Authority on draft search and rescue rules. I see significant advantages to the approach of externally contracting specialist aviation expertise as required. It gives you greater access to a range and depth and quantum of expertise compared to a standing appointment of a single expert on contract or otherwise. Notwithstanding the advantages of this approach, I am committed to examine our practice in this area, and my department will undertake further analysis of best practice in this area by reviewing oversight of aviation safety regulation in other jurisdictions and oversight of safety regulation in other sectors in Ireland. We're now moving to scope this work more fully and to decide the arrangements for delivery. Chairperson, I hope that clears up the matter. I have addressed this at the last meeting we've had here, and I'm very anxious that we proceed with the business of today, which is to move through and discuss and debate this legislation before us today.
Look, Minister, I want to thank you for the brief you have just given us with respect to the aviation expertise that are available in the IAA, and I'm delighted they are there. It is vitally important that the IAA are staffed with experts in the area in all aspects of aviation in order that they can do the job that we are legislating for them to do. But moving on from what Senator Doherty has said, I still have not got an answer today as to whether the Department of Transport has an aviation expert on their staff. I don't care how many contractors, how many consultants, how many anything else there is, and I will come back to the IAA's input into the legislation in a few moments, but I want a simple yes or no. Do we have an expert in the Department of Transport, employed by the Department of Transport, paid by the state, paying his or her PRSI, contributing to his or her pension for public service? Do we have such an expert on your staff? Yes or no? I mean, I cannot in all conscience, I cannot progress with legislation. And I know the Minister thinks that I'm trying to talk down the bill. I'm not. I want this bill passed. But if there is a question mark over the drafting of the bill, if there is a question mark as to who was involved, then as a parliamentarian I'm obliged to follow through and get answers to that question. And the first question I have asked, and it's a simple yes or no answer, do they have an aviation expert on their staff? I can answer it here myself from the AAIU's report, where they say that it is still under consideration. Now, if the answer is no, just simply say no and let's move on to the next section.
Speakers will now.
Party's point, if you want to answer. I've answered your question, Senator Craughwell. The parliamentary draftsperson from the AG's office provided the drafting advice, and the bill was prepared by officials within the department with the support of the IAA.
I think the Minister has responded, so we'll now put the question that the new...
No, the Minister has not responded under any circumstances. Not in our wildest imagination can we believe that the Minister has responded. The only thing I know now is that the Minister has told us there were consultants involved, that the IAA was involved in the drafting of this legislation. You're asking the people we want to regulate to draft the legislation. Come on, let's get serious here now. We should have total separation here between those that are to be regulated and those that are writing the regulation. I have no difficulties. Senator Buttermore brought up section 59 there about the advice that the IAA will provide to the Minister. That has nothing to do with the legislation. It's after the legislation is passed. The IAA have a role in advising whichever Minister is in power as to various things with respect to aviation. The IAA are the regulatory body that we are passing legislation through this House for. And if we cannot satisfy ourselves that there is a clear separation between the IAA and the drafters of the legislation, and I want to know who drafted the legislation, because if it was in-house people in the department, who drafted the legislation, and there are no aviation expertise on the staff, then where are we going?
I think you've made your questions extremely clear. I think the House has heard them.
But we can't move forward without answers.
Senator
To remind senators, this bill, it's mainly about reforming, it's about reforming structures. It's not about recreating the regulatory framework. Just in relation to the expert input, that was sought for the search and rescue. As I have said, in relation to this bill, the parliamentary draftsperson from the AG's office, yes, provided the drafting of this, the drafting advice, and the department officials worked with the IAA, who have all of that technical expertise that I have outlined earlier in relation to this. This is about, I suppose, a structural change within the regulatory framework here, and it's important to say that the IAA is an independent body. That's what we want to do here, to ensure that this legislation is in line with best practice across the world, across Europe, and that is the aim of this here today, Chair, to get this over the line.
Thank you, Minister.
And to talk, this legislation is about reforming the structures. It's not about the regulatory framework here.
Okay, so the question...
Chair, no, we're not going to put the question. We can't put the question because we haven't actually even debated the question apart from Senator Doherty's input.
Senator Craughwell, I have to be fair now to the Minister as well.
No, you have to be fair to the public. The public are the people you have to be fair to. The flying public. 4 people lost their lives. 4 loved people lost their lives in Rescue 116. And there were very clear recommendations laid down from that. Now, we are talking about a massive piece of legislation here, a massive piece of legislation that will regulate the air navigation transport in this country for years to come, right? And it would be wrong in every sense of the word if there is a conflict of interest anywhere in the drafting of this legislation. If the people who drafted it were the IAA, then it is wrong, Senator Buttermore, because at the end of the day, there had to be a separation between the regulated and the regulator. The regulator, if for example, let's say we decided in the morning that we would take this approach. And so why not put a couple of pilots onto the IAA who are also flying for some company or other? What sort of regulation would we have then? That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about mixing the regulated with the legislator, and that is fundamentally wrong. The AG's office, as my colleague has said, would be experts in the legality of drafting legislation. Tell me who the person in the Department of Transport that drafted this legislation was. Tell me what expertise that person had. By all means, he or she could have listened to the IAA. But if the IAA was the person holding the pen, then we have a serious problem, and this bill should not progress until we find out exactly who's who and what's what behind the drafting. And I'm sorry, Chair, I know that you want to push this forward, and the Minister wants to push it forward, and God knows everybody wants to push it forward. But it would be wrong of us to push forward flawed legislation. And if there is a conflict of interest somewhere in it, then it is deeply flawed. Please tell me that you wouldn't bring in your own children to sit down and agree the rules of the House. You know, it's just not the way it works.
Senator Craughwell, just for the record now, we've given 40 minutes to this amendment. I have given lots of time.
We gave 2.5 hours a week ago, and we still didn't get the answer. Yeah, a simple yes or no. I do have, I don't have. That gets us past this point.
I have to work within the parameters that I've beset here.
And I'm afraid the House decide the parameters, Chair. You know, and you can't just say, I'm the chair, I'm going to push this through, to hell with it. You know, you can't do that. And I am entitled as a public representative to get the answer yes or no. I'm obliged to do it. We are talking about safety. Already in this country, 4 people lost their lives, and the Department of Transport were damned to hell in the report of that for their failure to have proper oversight. So was the IAA, but less so because the IAA weren't sure of their responsibility in the area. We have to be realistic here today. We cannot ignore what has happened in the past. For those who don't remember the past are destined to relive it. And by God, if we're going to allow this go forward, knowing in our heart of hearts that this legislation was written by the very people who were setting out to regulate, then it is wrong in every sense of the word. Wrong, wrong, wrong. And I won't be bullied or bamboozled or anything into changing my position until I get an answer. And I just believe I'm entitled to that. If I get that answer, I will run through this legislation as quickly as we can. But I ain't running through legislation that was written by those who were trying to legislate for. It would be wrong. Don't tell me, in all your years of experience, that you would feel any different than me, Lascahirla.
Well, and honestly, in my capacity as chair, I'm limited in what I can say from this position. But I think the record will very clearly show the questions that have been set out to here today at length. I'm conscious Senator Doherty wants to make another contribution. So, Senator Doherty, and then we'll have to.
Thanks, Chair. I'm very conscious that the Minister has been at pains to say that this particular piece of legislation isn't about regulation. All of the amendments that have been put down that have caused the delay to this legislation in the last number of months are all about giving powers of regulation to the IAA. And so I'm really mindful as to why, in the Minister's response to tell us that she took on board contracted special aviation expertise in any of her dealings in relation to dealing with the IAA, whether it's the IAA's own functions, whether it was regard to developing search and rescue, which is a different topic, but it's related to the same recommendation, information with regard to search and rescue, and yet didn't feel the need to take on external contracted expertise other than the IAA to respond to all of these regulatory amendments in the aviation bill. Because I have to tell you, and I'm putting this on the record of the House, I really do believe we have a legal conflict of interest. And I would be minded, Chair, to suspend the sittings so that we as members can actually take legal advice as to whether we're doing something that contravenes a breach of trust between 2 authorities, one that's supposed to be governing the other, not the other governing the Department of Transport.
Given that the Leader of the House has made the statement that she did there, I'm going to propose an adjournment of the House for 5 minutes so that I can take advice on that and that we reconvene So can I move an adjournment to the House to suspension of the House to 5:05, please? Well, the Leader of the House has made an assertion that I believe needs to be investigated. So I'm proposing a suspension of the House to 5:05 so that I can take advice on what she has just said there. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, great. Okay, thanks. I understand the Leader of the House wishes to make a proposal. Senator
Chair, notwithstanding anything under standing orders from the Order of the Houses today, we are proposing that the committee stage of the Air Navigation and Transport Bill 2020 shall now adjourn to allow the House to receive legal advice on the impasse of the last hour and a half debate, but also to allow for the Minister to come back to us with her legal advice with regard to drafting the bill. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, to suspend until 6:30 p.m, Chair.
Is that agreed? Agreed. The House now suspended till 6:30.